All right, thank you very much, everyone who has joined us. This is Ibrahim Ahmed. I'm here. I'm an HR and trainings manager here at the National Incubation Center. With me, we have a very interesting guest, a very accomplished professional. उनका introduction भी मैं आपसे करवाऊंगा, and we are looking forward to a very insightful discussions. Either if you're part of a startup or you're part of an HR function in your organization, or if you're working in any corporate organization, this session is definitely for you. टॉपिक पे भी हम बात करेंगे, नेशनल इंक्यूबेशन सेंटर पे भी बात करेंगे. सो मैं क्विकली आपको इनसाइट्स दे दूं. यू गाइस नो अबाउट नेशनल इंक्यूबेशन सेंटर. वी आर वन ऑफ द फ्लैगशिप इंक्यूबेशन प्लेसेस हियर इन पाकिस्तान, funded by Ministry of IT and Telecom through Ignite, and Jazz and team up are the implementing partners of the national incubation centers. Over the past 4 years, we have incubated more than 200 startups, 220 to be precise. We have created more than 9,000 jobs, out of which 2,000 were direct jobs and 7,000 were indirect jobs as well. We have worked with startups and across Pakistan from different verticals. So we are not industry specific incubation platform. As long as there is a technology component in your startup or business idea, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be welcoming you on board. With us, we have a very accomplished guest who is Miss Alia Zafar. And what a profile she has. I'll try to do justice with her profile, but please, ma'am, excuse me if I miss out on something. She's a C-level professional. She was the first female director in the board of governance of Pakistan Cricket Board. She's a certified director from ICAP, which is an Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan. She is a certified job evaluator from Hague Group. She is a subject matter expert representing Pakistan for ISO 260 task groups at ISO. She's also a member of Prime Minister of Pakistan's second pay and pension subcommittee for national restructuring of compensation and benefits. She has a 26 plus years of experience serving at the large and complex corporate, public, and development sector organizations. We'll be definitely talking about the complex organizations made in private sector, public sector, or development sector, and what are the challenges. If you're a startup, this session is for you because we have this जो startup का culture होता है वो बड़ा survival से related होता है. आपको एक दिन आप एक काम कर रहे हैं, दूसरे दिन आपको दूसरा काम करना है, and it's like juggling multiple balls in one time. Or if you're part of a set organization, set business, and you're doing well, but still you have a future to take care of. So उसके लिए आप किस तरह से you can have a good strategy in place. हमारे organizations में, since I come from a learning and development institute or experience, so I've seen people spend a lot of time on strategies. They talk about ये करेंगे अगले 5 साल में, अगले 10 साल में हम ऐसा कर देंगे, ये होगा वो होगा, and then the reality hits us. And before we do that, thank you very much, Miss Alia, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on board, and I think it will be a learning session, at least for me and for our audience as well. I'll be asking some selfish questions as well, which will help me obviously to grow and learn in my domain, and then obviously some questions for the people who are listening to us. All the attendees who are part of this webinar, feel free to write your questions in the chat box. We'll get your questions. Those of you who are listening us on Facebook, please feel free to write your questions in the comment section. We will be addressing those questions as well. So the format is very simple. For the first 30-40 minutes, we'll have a discussion on this topic, culture, eat strategy for breakfast. ये topic क्या है, इसको हमने क्यों choose किया, इस पे भी मैं बात करूंगा. And then we'll have 10 to 15 minutes dedicated for you questions as well. But however, I would request कि अगर आपको during this session discussion में कोई question आपके जहन में है, तो please उसको hold ना कीजिएगा, type कर दीजिएगा, because sometimes we do forget when we reach the end of the webinar. So आपके questions यहाँ पे होंगे, and we'll see कि अगर कुछ questions discussion में incorporate हो सके, so we will do that as well. Once again, thank you very much, Alia, for joining us. And in the beginning, I would like you. I mean, I've seen your professional credentials. This is they are huge for me, and I think we need a very dedicated time for that as well to let audience know about it. But why not we listen it from you? If you can please briefly introduce yourself, what are you up to these days? What you have done in the past? What do you think of the topic? And do you think it's a need that we should talk about this topic?
Thank you very much. It's actually a pleasure to be here with you and with everyone who has joined us. For myself, I have about 26 years of experience. You've already sort of picked a few of the things which I've done in the past, which I'm doing now. Right now, I'm Group Head People and Organizational Excellence with BOP, which is Bank of Punjab. And I'm also on the Board of Governors of Pakistan Cricket Board. So that's a governance responsibility, obviously. When I'm with BOP, which is my daytime job, of course, that's my main focus is on people and it is on transformation. So this is one of the areas which is extremely close to my heart, I think, and I have a lot of experience in a number of organizations before that, where I have actually helped in transforming some of the people agendas, which are very much at the core of any organization. So from that perspective, when I look at strategy and this quotation, of course, Peter Drucker, it's the old one, I would say, but still it remains valid to date. And the reason I think is that this whole conversation around strategy and the conversation around culture is never sort of put together. And a lot of times organizations would and they do focus on strategy now much more than they were doing earlier. And a lot of the traditional way of, or I would say the culture of even looking at strategy was that the strategy in a traditional organization would be a document locked up with the CEO, and not anyone else would really be aware of what it is. Now, whether now that has changed for some organizations, for some, it still remains the same way. But having a strategy and having it filtered down to every person in the organization may not necessarily give you the results that you're hoping for. And I would eventually connect it to what, for example, startups are looking at in terms of strategy and in terms of culture, and what for them can make a real differentiation in terms of how they will move forward in a competitive environment where organizations have been there and have been established over a period of time, and they have very structured strategies and market products in place. And when any startup comes in, they are faced with this dilemma of what to look at. Do we look at strategy only, or do we look at culture, and where and how do we compete on these two areas? So I think that in itself becomes an interesting challenge. And from that perspective, I think going forward, we can look at what essentially we mean by both components, especially culture. But culture is one of the most forgotten elements, I think, in organizations. It's not something organizations focus on. So it's there, it's living and breathing, and yet it's not something which is measured. And what you do not measure, you essentially you cannot change. So if you do not know how to measure culture, so it essentially becomes a challenge in itself.
Agreed. I think you have rightly pointed out, and so I'll pick one word from two. I've actually picked three words out of it. One is culture, second is people, and transformation. And I think all three of them happens to be your expertise as well, and something that you have got a chance to deep dive into over the past 26 years as well. So starting from culture, and as you said, this quotation or this phrase from Peter Drucker is still very relevant uh, after all these years. I want to know what is the definition of culture for Alia. How do you define culture? A, B, how do you define organizational culture? And then my third question and part C of this would be how do you differentiate between the culture in startups versus in culture in big organizations, or let's say SMEs? This sounds like a board question to you. Maybe it might sound like a board question. Please draw a label diagram where necessary. Explain with suitable examples. So culture, your understanding and definition of it, how do you differentiate the culture of startup versus the SMEs and big organizations?
Great, thanks a lot. Thank you. And it's an interesting set of questions, and I'll try to respond to all. So, for me personally, how do I connect to culture? And I'll give you a bit of a story here. So, I was working in Rome, and as a Pakistani working in Rome, of course, you are faced with a different culture there. And the elements of culture obviously are completely different from how we look at a number of areas. While on my way back to Pakistan, where was planning to start working back in Pakistan, I boarded the plane, and there was a lady sitting next to me. And having traveled a lot and having worked in, I would say, international organizations for quite some time, you tend to sort of your brain gets sort of wired in a certain way. So the lady sitting next to me started asking me questions, and the questions very quickly, within the first 3 minutes, turned to very personal questions. And I was a little bit taken back. And then I was looking at it from this perspective, that this is how we actually react to culture and different cultural aspects that are all around us. Now, whether to answer or not, to be offended by such questions or not, is a different matter altogether. But what it sort of made me think was that we tend to see the world through cultural glasses. And we tend to do that all the time, and our cultural glasses can change, and they do change, and we do get rewired in terms of where we are living, where we are working. So I think there's a very key learning in terms of diversity in this, if you can understand that as well. But at the end of it, essentially, culture is something, when you look at it from an organizational perspective, it's all those things that are not part of the rules. So it's how the people react, what you affirm, what you recognize, what's unconscious. It's part of the key for you to think in terms of how unconscious habits, and 1,000 of them, become part of your embedded form or way of doing things in a particular organization. Now, that for me is how it's defined in terms of an organization and how an organization reacts to culture. Now,
Yeah.
there is an element, of course, of tradition and values, which we must always remember. So, when we talk about culture, it's the nature of the beast is such that the tradition and values will help make it what it is. Now, you do have traditions and values coming from, for example, your vision and mission, and yet you have another subset which is going on around you.
Yeah.
And that becomes more and more, and it actually is embedded into habit, and I'll talk about that later. But though that component essentially is what culture in an organization is all about. And then when you look at big organizations or small organizations, yes, every organization will have a different set of culture. And
Yeah.
because every organization has different set of people, and the purpose of these people coming together is altogether different. In a non-profit organization, the culture may be somewhat different. In a for-profit organization, it may be different. In organizations which are working in terms of how the strategy links with their culture, how the DNA is the same, the output would be different. The end product will be different. The harmony of it would be different. So it's really
Yeah.
complete combined experience of how we think, how we feel, and how we act is what it's
Yeah.
all about.
Thank you for the very comprehensive answer. And a few words that I've picked from it is habits, beliefs, are probably upbringing and social conditioning, which is true for either culture of an organization or even of a place. Like you have shared the example of Rome and you fly back to Pakistan. Which essentially, and then again, all of it is connected with the people. So I think one of the foundations of culture, uh, two foundations of culture is one, people, b, change or many change, right? Because if it's good and you want to upgrade, that requires certain change, or if it's not good and you want to upgrade or make it better, that requires a change as well. And I think one key component and the other word that I picked was habit. Because if I've developed certain set of beliefs and habits based on my experience, my exposure, my upbringing, so when I walk into an organization, or even if I'm a startup founder, so those habits and set of beliefs walks with me as well, right? And then I'm suddenly exposed to a different world that requires me to do things in a certain way, following certain processes, for example certain SOPs, and then the key component of getting along with other people in the organization or the system as well. So if you have to define, or if you have to talk about this, like how we normally react to culture and change, and does that mean the habits or the bringing or the belief system that we have, is it like supportive, or does it react, or does it raise its guards, okay, oh no, we don't need to change, we don't need to. What is your understanding or insight about it as well, in terms of change in culture?
Right. So I think a lot of what we talk about in terms of change in culture, if it's a forced change, for example, and it does not link with the DNA of the organization, there will be challenges. And those challenges you need to understand in terms of how the culture will actually impact strategy. And that's why, of course, this quotation, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think it's eats strategy for lunch as well as for dinner. So it's literally, and
Yeah,
especially now with COVID and now with our fluid workspaces, it's actually all over the place. Um, but
yeah,
at the end of the day, I think I think there was this book, The Power of Habit. If you have heard about it, it was
yeah,
a bestseller. Charles Duhigg, I think, wrote it. And it explored this really strong, deep rooted role which habits play in our lives. And this is especially so for work, because these are built through various triggers, and we go through these loops, and uh, we tend to sort of go through the same loops again and again. So that kind of triggering can take a lot of forms. So in a particular time of the day, you have a particular time to have tea, and you have it at a particular area, and there are some people there who will always talk about certain things. So it's a particular context, it's the physical feeling also, in a sense. So these triggers essentially tell you how to measure your own thoughts.
mhm,
And until and unless you can actually go to the root of it, and this is all about people, and until and unless you can actually link with that and understand that these habits will not be changed because you come up with a strategy paper. And if you want a substantive change in these, you really require that you change the trigger. And now you're changing the trigger requires that you build an anticipation of some kind of reward, because there is already a reward for the habit. Because
mhm,
any habit that you have, for example, of having pasta, for example, on a weekend, it is comforting. Why is it comforting? It's a habit, it's a tradition that you create in your own
yeah,
home. You come back home, you change, you sit, and you want to have tea first, or you want to play with your child. It's a habit that you form, which actually has an anticipation built up, and then it has a reward. In the same way, in organizations, these small traditions create reward mechanisms. So we need to understand, and we need to create those reward mechanisms. We need to build strong traditions within the organization, especially when you're going for a change or a transformation. So that transformation requires that you think about and you clearly have a roadmap defined for what are the new traditions that you are going to start, and how strongly are and how are you going to embed those so that your strategy is supported by your traditions. So it's
yeah.
a very complex equation, but they need to go hand in hand.
Great. So this brings me to my another set of questions, as you rightly said in my first question. First, I want you to ask. I want to ask you. Okay, so if I'm a startup founder, or if I'm part of National Incubation Center, or I'm just I founded my startup anywhere. Uh, and so I go through a different stages. Like for me, the first challenge would be the survival challenge, right? As the global
Yeah.
stats says, 97% of businesses, they are wrapped up in the first 3 years, right? For multiple reasons. However, there is this one saying that says, the only reason for the success or a failure of a startup is the founder or the founding team itself, which again brings us to this question of habits, beliefs, and the strategy in place. But once I graduate from the survival mode, then probably it's about the sustainable mode. And once I graduate from the sustainable mode, then it's a scaling mode as well, where I have to scale. I go into the mass production. I have to explore other markets as well. But when I'm in the survival mode, so chances are, I think my whole focus would be just to get my product ready, for example, for entrepreneurs. So maybe there is no much focus on setting up any culture. So everyone does everything, literally, right? So the same set of founding team members, they'll be doing finances, they'll be doing the tech part, they'll be doing the marketing and other functions as well. And once they realize they are growing or they need more support, they bring in more people, which sometimes do share the same vision that you had as a founder, or sometimes they don't. They're just there for the JD that they've been hired for, right? So which brings us to the part of ownership as well. So how do you or what is your advice to the startup founders who have graduated from different phases? Now they started, let's say, from two people, founder, co-founder. Now they have about, let's say, a team of 5 people, for example, or 10 people. Some of them might own your cause, and some are there just for the JD they've been hired for. How can we find that alignment, I would rather say, or that tuning the okay, frequency match हो in terms of, and then again कि वो strategy in different phases में कैसे define कर सकते हैं, because obviously जैसे जैसे वो evolve कर रहे हैं तो उनका culture भी change हो रहा है. But हमारा startup culture is more, let's say, yes, there is a hassle, but वो थोड़ा सा hip भी है. I need comfortable sofas, for example, music चल रहा है, कोई थोड़ा बहुत वो आपस में a very relaxed माहौल भी है. So what do you advise to those founders as well, how they should go about setting up an organizational culture? Because like I said, it is said that the only barrier and reason for success or failure of any startup is the founder or the founding team itself. And I think their habits play a part here as well.
I think I would probably not really necessarily agree with this idea of when you are at a survival mode, you do not focus on culture. Because I think that in itself is one of the reasons for a lot of failures. And what's the problem here? And what's the psychology of it that we need to understand? Any group of people, when they come together, as an organization, whether it's a small organization or a big organization, why are they coming together? They are coming together essentially to compete against another group of people, another company in the market. Now, they must and they do have, it's not that they don't have, they do have this unique ability as humans to give themselves to that group of people. It's a key to how you can actually break this food chain. The key is essentially within the culture. Now, how would I explain that for a startup? So if you're a startup and you're looking for some kind of technology, some kind of new product to be introduced into an industry, having a different technology will never be enough. It will never be enough because there will be other people who will either have the same technology, they will have the similar product. You look at banking, for example, products are pretty much the same everywhere. Then somebody else might clone whatever you are doing with some new features. So how do you differentiate? So the differentiation, I think the differentiation will come when you discount this. And how do you discount it? You look at the opportunity to compete on culture. And I will probably give you an example, which is one of the most famous one, I suppose, and that is on SpaceX. So SpaceX, you would know Elon Musk's space startup. So the space startup came in with, you had these traditional aerospace companies, they had been there and they had done everything and they had every component already with them and they had designed and they had no challenge as such. Now, how could SpaceX compete in something like that, in an environment where everything was already available. And yet, how could Elon Musk achieve the kind of success? You always think of and look at the culture of
Yeah.
SpaceX, and how did they sell that culture? So they basically, what the way they looked at it was, which are the 2 3 areas where we can compete and we cannot compete. So what is the area where they were bound to fail is what they focused on. So you cannot compete on something other than reliability, essentially. So what do? You pick up those elements which are for you the deal makers rather than the deal breakers. And for example, in SpaceX, what they did was they built they built quickly, they built cheaper, and that is the success that brought them, I think, with the name that they have made. So
Yeah.
existing companies were not culturally equipped to match their product cycle or the
Mhm.
product pricing.
Yeah.
So that's how they actually aced the game. It was all about culture. So when you
Yeah.
look at examples from internationally available examples, actually, you do see that culture in startups is one of the key elements. And then you look at, for example, Nuri Lights from Africa, and this is a social entrepreneurship program. And the challenge they had was they were doing very well in Africa, and then they expanded into India, and that didn't work out because of culture. So cultural
Mm.
differences in both countries, and it's a very complex study on this, but cultural differences, what was extremely successful in Africa could not work, although it seemed that both the countries requirement was the same, both the countries need was the same, and yet when they went for the expansion, it just didn't work out. So it really
Yeah.
depends on how you connect with the culture and how you understand it and utilize that component within your strategy.
Yeah, so I think so. One key takeaway, please correct me if I'm wrong, is the cultural sensitization. It's very important to be understanding and to develop that kind of, understanding of a culture where either you are expanding or you're going into a market, and obviously within the organization as well. So in my set of questions, I am left with last three, four questions. So two interesting aspects. One of the participants actually asked this question as well, so I'll club it with mine. So we have seen a certain set of culture, let's just say pre 2005, for example, and then with the technology and everything coming in, we have seen an entirely different culture in the last 15 years. And I think we're heading towards another different set of culture or the processes for businesses as well in the next, just say, number of years. But in these years, we have seen induction of two things, no two things, two segments of the society. One is called millennials, the other is called Gen Z. So they came with their own emotional, like you said, their own set of beliefs, their exposure, experience, and then probably their own emotional state as well. Previously, we didn't see organizations putting a lot of emphasis on the mental well-being of their employees. They were only concerned with the numbers, right? Now we have seen that changing as well. Since I'm heading the training portfolio of the team up as well, so in our experience for working with different clients, what we have seen is कि जब हम उनसे भी बात करते हैं, so when you interact with front force, they say बहुत अच्छी चीज है, यही होना चाहिए, बस ये हमारे मैनेजर्स को समझा दें। उनसे बात करते हो कहते हैं, क्या बात है, यही तो हम चाहते हैं, आप जरा हमारे डायरेक्टर्स को समझा दें। हम उनके पास जाते हैं, हम उनसे बात करते हो, कहते हैं यही तो हमारा मसला है, हम यही चाहते हैं, लेकिन ये जरा नीचे वालों को समझाते हैं। So the lack of ownership is there as well. And now we have seen a lot of organizations, even millennials are right now in some director level positions as well. How do you think Gen Z and millennials can better cope up with these cultural changes or in the workplace, and how they can tune their set of beliefs, habits in terms of change? Because I think you might have seen that clip from Simon Sinek as well. He has shared
Yeah.
extensive information on that,
Right.
managing
Mm.
millennials at workplace, and at the same time the sense of entitlement a lot of millennials or Gen Z has, right? Just because they think they deserve it, they should have it, versus making an effort to get it, right? Whereas in the organizations the culture is very different. And then we see a lot of एक्सक्यूजेस, जो कि मेरी बॉस से बनती नहीं है ना, तो इसलिए मुझे प्रमोशन नहीं मिली। वो मेरे जो बॉस है वो किससे बनती है तो उसी के सबसे होता है। चूंकि मैं पॉलिटिक्स नहीं करता तो इसलिए ऐसा होता है, चूंकि मैं हर मीटिंग में सबकी वाह वाह नहीं करता तो ऐसा होता है, so these are some of the victim mindset in play that you can see in action as well. So how we can cope up with Gen Z, millennials, their expectations while they're becoming part of the workforce here in the organizations. And the reason why I'm asking this is because most of them are now either setting up their businesses as entrepreneurs, or they are part of the startups as well as the team members.
So thank you very much for the question. It's a very interesting one. I think I've been connecting with millennials a lot over the last few years, and what I've seen is that we can't sort of club them into one particular slot. It's like a box, and I don't think we can box any generation into anything anymore. And the reason is very simple. We have a variety of population. We have diversity in Pakistan. And when you go, for example, to Quetta, or you connect with millennials from KPK, and especially from the previously agencies in Kolkata. So, and the kind of entrepreneurship spirit that they have, the way they connect with the digital landscape, I find it extremely exciting to connect with their ideas and the way they react to work. The challenge that millennials have, and especially those whom you may assume have had some privileges in life, so they are coming from a sort of upper strata of society. Their challenge, I think, I tend to empathize with their situation, which is actually extremely difficult because they have been born with a silver spoon. They have been born with a lot of support from their parents. And what happens when you are provided that support? You have a car to go to your school, you don't take a bus. What does it take away and what does it give you? It takes away from you a life skill of learning to manage yourself on your own, learning to cope with traffic, learning to cope with heat, learning to cope with every kind of passenger sitting next to you. Patience, you reduce your own child's capacity to cope. So when we provide, and over a period of time, a lot of parents have provided, when you provide a benefit, you do take away a skill, a life skill, which these children have actually not been exposed to. So now when they enter the workforce, they are now at par with everyone else who has taken a bus as well. And their life skills are completely different, and their coping skills are completely different. On the other hand, this strata are absolutely inundated within their own peer groups with peer pressure of the kind we had never experienced. So on Instagram, on every page, everything that they open, everybody seems to be having a perfect life. So having fun at work, and there are pictures, and there is food, and there are parties, and how do they connect when they go back to their own space? They feel internally lonely. They don't know how to cope. So they would do the same thing, pretend. And that culture in itself, they bring to the organization as well. So coping mechanisms are one of the key elements that require to be there, I think, in terms of how the millennials are going to manage themselves. I don't think we can take we can be the judges of anyone coming into the workforce. They're adults, and it's how they connect with work. Having you said victim mentality again comes from various backgrounds, not necessarily in one segment. You see it in older segments of various generations working. Now 5 generations are working within the workspace. You see it everywhere. It's how the behavior is structured, and that structure can be changed actually through a number of traditions and values that you set within the organization, and how you utilize certain tools within the organization also to help them.
Right. Thank you very much for a very insightful answer. And I think I'll be just including 2 questions right now shared by Ms. Shahira Bukhari. because these are something about the discussion that we are already having. And Raza will definitely answer your question after this conversation as well. Please stay with us. So, as I know, and then obviously some people already know as well that you have been part of a lot of setups where you have led the change, right? And I personally know someone who can vouch for it, that the organization where you led the change initiative was an entirely different organization in terms of culture before you walked in and then before you walked out. And they say a lot of good things that you see right now it goes to your name, it goes to your credits, right? So Shahira Bukhari has asked, you have recently taken an initiative of revising the cultural values of your organization. How was your experience in making people at all levels understand the importance of cultural values and their impact? I think the key word for this question is people at all level, right? So please, we would need this.
Yes, uh, yes, indeed. I think it's a lot to do with having very honest conversations. And I think I am extremely lucky to be in an organization where the teams at all levels are open to communication, open to new ideas, and it's wonderful to see that, because when I joined BOP has a lot of various generations working there, and people who have been there 25 years and 28 years and 30 years, and people tend to assume that anybody who has been there for that long would not want to look at change. But I think a lot of it is having very honest conversations, and being open and upfront about the challenges that we face as an organization and the transformation journey, and how exciting it is to be part of something which is changing the very dynamics of this industry, and how we are now leading in so many directions within the industry. How exciting it is to be part of that team which is going to make it. So it's I think it is a collective energy of the group from the top to the very bottom, and I think that really brings us all together. So how it comes up, it comes up because you are open, and you are as open as you can be in your communication. You don't hold back, you don't hold back strategy, you don't hold back anything, you don't hold back your doubts. As the top management, you share your doubts as well. You share, okay, we can do this, maybe this we do, it will not work, it might work, let's try it. So essentially having that really honest conversations at every level, one-on-one focus groups, Facebook lives, smaller groups, but at every level, so that everyone is asking questions and responding to questions and being honest about what we are talking about. So I think that has really been a differentiating factor over here.
Right. I think questions and then being honest about it is one thing that is something we need to. वो कहते हैं कि सवाल जवाब का मुर्शद होता है. So the question is teacher of an answer. So it's very important that you should ask right questions and then be very honest with the answers as well. Um, So Raza has asked, what creates organizational culture? How is culture in the organization set? What do you do if you want a particular culture which is not there? Ask Miss Alia about how HPL culture was changed and why it was changed. Why was it changed? What was the need and how was the need realized? I'm not sure if you can speak on behalf of HBL, but if you have any insights, please feel free to share.
Yeah, I was in HBL when the transformation took place, actually. So that's why I think he's
Okay.
probably asking. If
Okay.
I can sort of think back, the requirement of change is always because the direction of the organization has moved. And back in 2005, when we joined, and I was part of the core restructuring team at that time, HBL was running losses, essentially. So it was a ship which was going underground. And there can't be a better reason to change than just that. So obviously, the impetus to change came from the fact that the organization, the reason that the organization existed seemed to be drifting away, and there were losses, and everybody was going to essentially be hurt by that, the organization and the people. And that was the reason for change. And then, of course, this was a whole journey, and it went on for about 7 to 10 years, because any big organization requires, and especially if it's a very sort of hierarchy based organization, you need to take on some incremental changes in some areas, and some exponential changes in some other areas. So it's how you balance these out, and that's how it actually the journey was taken. In terms of how and what we need to look at when we are talking about culture and change, I think there are 3 to 4 elements. Actually, there will be five elements which are extremely important. First is, when you look at culture, what do you look at? There are key elements that you need to understand. The first one is innovation and risk taking. So a lot of our organizations say that we would love to have innovation and we are risk taking, but this is most of the time lip service. How do we treat employees when they do take risks? Have a look at that and see how and when they fail, how we do and what we do. And are we only rewarding success? So, failure, and what is failure teaching us, and how do we react to failure, is extremely important. I'll again go back to Elon Musk's organization and how failure became something which was pretty much a part of the process. Then the second, I think, element which is very important is how the quality of work, the quality of precision in terms of execution is there. And that's the second element in terms of culture that you need to look at. How you are oriented towards outcomes. So I've worked in an international organization where the outcome was really not the challenge. What they were not even looking at it. They were looking at the process. So when you look only at the process and you do not look at the outcome of it, the process was perfect, the outcome was never there. So you can't do that. Again, it's the way the culture works. Then conscious and unconscious ways in terms of self-interests and how these sometimes can come together and how we need to understand them is another element. This would be probably this is the third element, I think, that we need to look at. Then we look at people orientation and team orientation, which is the key to any kind of management of culture. So you look at how people react to themselves, how they take the decisions, how the decision, and how ego plays a part in any kind of decision. And then team orientation, which is the most important element at the end of the day, because teams are what makes or breaks an organization. And how these activities around teams, the quality of teams, the quality of output, the quality of outcome in terms of precision, how they perform, especially how they perform when you're not there as a leader. It's a measure. It's a measure of how we actually react, and it's a measure of the culture. So any company where you can have A players, you can have people who are A players but who are not loyal to you. You can have A players who will steal your influencers. You can have A players who are lone wolves. Again, a problem. So you need to look at all these elements, but these 5 elements are what you normally would track to see where you're going in terms of direction. And as I said in the beginning, what you do not measure, you cannot fix.
Interesting. Interesting. And I think we have got a very relevant question from Hamza and Shahira as well, based on the discussion that you have just said. So 2 things that I have picked from this, and I'll club it with the questions that Hamza and Shahira has asked. People and team orientation is one, and the second is diversity and inclusion. So Hamza has asked, and the third is that, okay, so organization says that we have a culture of innovation and risk taking, but are we only rewarding successes? If people don't, if people fail in terms when they go for innovation or they take risks, what are we doing with them as well? Are they getting any even acknowledgement for that matter? So team orientation, rewarding only success, diversity and inclusion is one part of it. The second is, uh, So the Shahira asked that how we can ensure that organizational जो आपके vision है, जो values of your organization है, especially when you're trying to maintain a diversity and inclusion in your workplace, how you can maintain the sanity of your organizational values. But an interesting question that I wanted to ask as well, but I think Hamza has pointed out at the right time. Is there any key insights on how to maneuver the ever prevalent state culture here in Pakistan? We have seen from organizations where people, they talk about innovation, they talk about risk taking, they talk about a lot of things, but at some point in time, we do see some state mentality there as well. Or is it just a myth? What's your take on that? And second is again that how can we ensure the diversity part and inclusion part is still in place while and and keeping the organizational values aligned with the people, because sometimes when you try to achieve diversity you
Mhm.
tend to lose out on the people who are not aligned with your organizational vision, mission, and goals. Like you said, your A players might steal your influencers for that matter. So how do we align them?
So I think in terms of alignment, it's important what your values are as an organization and how you define them. For example, we redefined our values at BOP, and one of the key value that we have is of empathy. And if you
Mm,
have empathy, you will connect to your community, you will connect to your customer, you will connect to your internal employees, you will connect to everyone. And that connection is what we require as humans. So essentially, we look at every angle or every aspect um, of HR from the perspective of a human value design concept. So you are looking at designing the tools from a human perspective. So that means that the first aspect that you look at is the well-being of the people around you. Then the more important element, which, for example, at BOP, we have, you may have seen the tagline, Har Fard Ka Khayal. It's really caring for community. So the purpose of the organization is not just to make money. The purpose is to help communities, to help build communities around us. The same way, this is the year of our people within the organization internally. So we are focusing on what are the key elements which will provide that sense of well-being to the organization, to the people within the organization. So that's how you link your value system to all the products, the services that you provide, and internally what you look at in terms of how we interact with the employee life cycle. So that's the first part of the question, and I've forgotten the second part. What was the second thing that Hamza asked? ये उम्र का मसला है
uh,
भाई.
no, it's okay. Hamza asked us about the seat culture.
अच्छा,
He
हाँ, yeah,
asked,
now I
are there
remember. Yeah,
any
yeah, okay.
key
Yeah, yeah.
insights on how to maneuver the seat culture?
I think again it is about the challenge that we have is of what creates problems in culture. One is habits. The second is ego. Now, when you
Mm,
talk about state culture, obviously not everybody is alike, and there are some very good organizations being run by very good people. But essentially, it's about ego. Now, if you learn to manage the ego and the habit formation of a particular group of people who you are reporting into, that means you have learned to manage people well. It's not something which cannot be done. It is very much doable. And you need to understand people more, and you need to understand how you connect with that element or that part of their psyche, so that you're able to work comfortably and have a comfortable working relationship. However, having said that, if it is toxic, um, and you are unhappy, you should always think of looking at other options, because some people at times can be completely, in terms of their ego, so drowned in it that their souls are drowned in it. So then you really can't really help them.
Yeah.
So then it's time for
Right.
you to move.
It's time for you to probably move on. Okay, Maria, I'll ask you a question right. But before I ask you a question, I have one thing based on the points that I have picked from your recent answer. Alia, you talked about empathy, compassion, and putting people and taking care of them as well, and not just and their well-being as well. But do you think at some point in time, this empathy, compassion, a flexible work culture, okay, there are large chunk of organizations that where people say, okay, we need this kind of a culture, right? But then there are organizations who have very flexible culture, very comforting environment. People are very compassionate. They practice empathy as well. But then things usually are taken for granted there. And whenever, even if you try to introduce a minor change in it, for example, तो वो यूजुअली वर्कफोर्स उस कंफर्ट जोन में जा चुकी होती है कि अगर आप कोई माइनर सा भी एक नया स्टेप ऐड करते हैं, सो दे थिंक ओ ये शायद एक बहुत बड़ी जिम्मेदारी है, वी डोंट हैव टाइम फॉर इट, और डू वी इवन नीड दैट, देयर इज अ सर्टेन resistance to it as well, especially in Pakistani context. Based upon my limited experience, what I've seen is कि जिनके पास नहीं है flexibility, they ask for it. जिनके पास है, they are so flexible that they don't want anything to put them in check as well. So वो they I've heard these things that people take these kind of facilities for granted. Is it even true? If not, then what's your take on this?
It may not necessarily be true for all organizations. I think a lot of this comes from, again, the culture of thinking that we are all cheaters and we are all thieves.
Mm,
I do think that when you give people space to perform, there have been a lot of studies done on this as well. The productivity in terms of work from home has actually improved, and the challenge actually over there is not being able to create a wall between your work and your other life. So it becomes too fluid, and that's where the challenge lies right now. Having said that, it may be a problem in some organizations, and that problem actually essentially comes from within the organization's culture. Now, what is the culture in an organization, assuming that this is happening? This is happening, and first of all, of course, there is no conversations on performance. There are no outcome-oriented approach towards work, which I had talked about earlier. If it was an outcome-oriented organization, there will be no check and balance. You don't require it because you have an outcome, you have something to deliver, and that whether you sit at home or on the road or in the office, you have to deliver. There is a timeline and you need to deliver, or there is element of a reward attached to it as well. So essentially it means that the culture or the tools that the HR has provided are not, or the supervisors and the supervised resources are not educated enough, and they do not introspect on it. So again, what I was referring to earlier, the 5 elements that we need to monitor, if you are monitoring them, if you're monitoring precision and high quality of work, and if you're monitoring the outcome, this will not happen.
right. I think that totally makes sense. So, last question from Maria before we wrap it up. Uh, she says an employer should be equal opportunity employer that shouldn't be discriminating on basis of sex, disability, color, or ethnic background. But if you talk about persons with disabilities in particular, they need more time and training to be capable enough. Also, a bit of extra resources. What should be the strategy of distribution of human and resources of an organization that won't let any barrier in smooth running of overall operations? So I think what she wants to ask is that if an organization decides to get people with disabilities on board, that means they need some more time for training or employability skills before they can actually perform. So how can an organization go about develop a certain strategy where that opportunity cost doesn't come as a barrier for organizations operations and processes?
Right. Thank you very much for that question. It really is very close to my heart. We have been working in BOP on all these elements in terms of diversity and inclusion. This is part of our DNA. What we have done so far in terms of persons with different abilities, or you call them persons with disabilities, uh, essentially what you do is like what we have done is we have engaged with certain organizations which are adept at and helping such persons come to the workforce. Also, it's not one kind of training only. You see, the person you are bringing in is to be trained. Number one, you need to have the right environment in terms of physical workspaces, and the second environment is the people around. So you require all three components to be there to support those persons. So we have made that commitment to our employees who are coming in with disabilities. First, to provide them the training and consistently provide them the physical environment, which gives them the enabling um, tools to be comfortable, and then provide training to the teams around them so that they are
Mm,
sensitized and understand how to interact. So these three
yeah.
elements need to be done as part of the strategy of an organization, and support and really appreciate the fact that we can and we do have the capacity to go together in one direction.
Great. I think you have rightly pointed out that it's not just the training that those people need, but also the team and the organization that needs a gender sensitization and probably training on these areas as well, so they are more accommodating to these people. Thank you very much, Alia, for your precious time and the very key insights based upon people, strategy, culture, habits, beliefs, and your five takeaways. We'll definitely try to put it out on social media as well, so more people can reach out, can see that. But before we close, I would request one final comment from you. If you have to summarize your experience of working with people for 26 years in 2 3 lines, what you have realized is what it takes to get the most out of the people, anything what an organization needs to do to make sure that, even though we have touched on a lot of these things already in the discussion, but if I can ask you to filter it for me in just, let's just say, 2 3 4 sentences, what is it that you want to say to the people or organization or individuals that they should take care of, either as a startup founder or as part of the team in big organizations, if they want a good healthy culture?
I think take care of each other first and
Mm,
foremost. Be human
okay.
towards each other. Understand that everyone is coming to that organization with their own insecurities, with their own fears, and nobody
Mm,
is there to snatch your job. Be focused on your work. Be an expert on whatever field. Help each other in whatever project it may be. You have spare time. Do not think twice. Help someone. That builds your own skill.
mm.
Be a team
Wow.
player. It actually helps the organization. And be honest and true to yourself. That's essentially what it is all about. Do trust others and do respect others. And that means respecting the sweeper. That means
Mm.
respecting every person, because every person is bringing value to an organization.
Wow, that is very powerful, and I think that's I mean, very distilled, filtered learning that you have shared. But just to reinforce it one more time, take care of each other. Everyone who is listening to us or who will listen to us, the recording of this on our Facebook Live page, everyone in your organization comes with their own set of insecurities. So please be patient with them. Help each other, and if you have free time, don't wait a second. Go and help someone. Be a team player. Be honest and true to yourself, and do trust and respect each other. And this respect and trust starts from the sweeper. Don't just wait for your managers or people in your ties, and okay, only you have to respect them or trust them. Trust everyone in your organization. Thank you very much, Alia, for your time and this insightful discussion. I hope and I wish that you will be available for our support. As always, you have been a very generous supporter of the Team Up's mission and the National Incubation Center. We have very few friends, like we say, friends of NIC and Team Up. You are definitely on the top three, I would say, based upon what I have heard from Pravesh Sab and Zohair Sab. Thank you very much. It was lovely hosting you. If there's anything you would like to say, or from our side, I think we can close it because it's already 10. So yeah.
Thank you so much. No, I think we've taken enough of their time, and they need to sort of think and introspect, just think about what we've been discussing. I think that would be a great takeaway for everyone. Thanks a lot,
Right. Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone who's listening us and who will listen to us. We hope we were able to add some value to your learning, and you will be able to practice some of the concepts that we have shared. Alia has discussed the experience she has shared. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Khuda Hafiz.